Every character ever written has a motivation. Many will be simple and small, like just clocking to work or being by their lonesome. Other characters' motivations can be massive, like dreams to change the world. The latter are often who we center our stories around, because, let's face it, they're probably more interesting. But in today's video, I'd rather look at the first group, the characters with dreams of simple duties who end up leading a grand story that they want nothing to do with. The ones who are chosen by other people or by prophecies, rather than getting to choose themselves. In this video, we're going to be focusing on characters who are defined by their competence and their influence, but have little to no resolve. The reason I mention these three traits is because I believe they make the core of every protagonist ever written. This video is actually part 3 of my protagonist series, where I try to map out different tropes based on a character's blend of these three traits. Competence is all about ability, strength, smarts, magic, anything to help overcome the story's obstacles. Influence is all about magnetism. Whether it's through title or charisma, it's anything used to change other characters' minds. Lastly, resolve, like motivation but tenfold. It's having a belief or a desire that a character can't live without. And the stars of today's videos don't have it, at least at first. I've noticed that as stories progress, protagonists will naturally move toward the center of this chart. They will achieve a balance between all three traits, giving them ample opportunity to extend their stories. So when I plot a character on this graph, it's my attempt at pinning them at the start of their stories. The focus today are characters who begin their stories with a strong combination of both competence and influence, but lack resolve. For this reason, I'm calling them prodigies. They're the best at getting things done, and characters gravitate around them, which results in little autonomy over their own fates. In all of these stories, the characters will eventually have to build up the resolve it takes to pursue what it is they really want. But whether that aligns with the pressures around them is up to the story. And in these 4 examples I've found, we can see the different ways that can manifest. But before we dive into the examples, I want to thank today's sponsor, War Thunder,
the hottest free-to-play military game that expertly complements the duo of action and realism. In War Thunder, action comes in all shapes and sizes, allowing the player to choose their style. From sky-high dogfights, ground-based tank battles, and even naval warfare, the gameplay is always intense. But what brings the action to the next level is how they pair it with expert realism. For instance, shooting a tank's tracks off will actually immobilize it. They also offer a wide variety of iconic vehicles from the mid-20th century to modern day, each packed with unique characteristics and behaviors. War Thunder listens to their player base and continually updates the physics, sounds, and graphics to keep the experience as immersive as possible. In the latest Hornet Sting update, they introduced top-tier fighters like the Su-30 and the Fa-18, as well as a complete overhaul of their naval battles. See this all for yourself and download War Thunder for free using the link below, available on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox. And the best part, any new players or players who haven't played in 6 months will receive 100,000 Silver Lions, the Eagle of Valor Decorator, and more. Plus, you can even try War Thunder Mobile for free on iOS or Android with the link in the description. Thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring this video.
For the first example of this prodigy trope, I want to highlight one of the most chosen ones I've ever seen in media. The man's name is Paul Atreides, and what we're mainly going to focus on is his journey in Dune 1. It's only a third of his story, but I think it does a really good job showcasing the path that this prodigy character trope will often follow. So let's see how he embodies influence and competence and what his path to resolve looks like. I mentioned earlier that influence will come in the form of title or charisma. Paul Atreides is not only the son of the Duke of House Atreides, but he's also the son of a Bene Gesserit. With those 2 roles alone, he's instantly one of the most influential characters in his universe. Right off the bat, we also learn that Paul is a significantly competent character as well. We see that he wields this power of the voice, and sure, he hasn't quite mastered it, but with it, he can do what others can't. We also see that he's a talented fighter going toe-to-toe with Gurney. So yeah, super obvious influence and competence. But what about resolve? What is it that Paul wants, and how far is he willing to go get it? He wants to fight with Duncan, but that quickly gets shut down by his father because there are more important calls to answer. That's not to say he has no resolve, though. With this box scene, we can see that he's got a willpower to keep going, but in a direction that's chosen for him, not one he chooses for himself. For these reasons, I would probably put Paul at 60% influence, 30% competence, and 10% resolve, landing him with the prodigies. If the theory behind this framework holds true, he'll eventually gain resolve and move toward the center of the chart. But until then, it'll be his influence and competence that move this story forward. When characters have such high influence, their stories often start on autopilot, meaning Paul doesn't have to pursue anything because his story is already set in motion. His family is given a claim to Arrakis, and so they move there and get accustomed to the planet. We do get flashes of his competence that keep his story in motion too, though, like when a hunter drone tried to assassinate him and he was able to catch it. But the story picks up when he's taken hostage. Here he uses competence again to save his own skin. Using the voice, he's able to set his mother free, who then dispatches the entire crew of captors. Yes, his mother's abilities with the voice are greater than his, but ultimately his competence was what gave her a fighting chance to begin with. On the topic of resolve, all Paul is really focused on is his family's protection. His mother's resolve is a much larger driving force. She's committed to the work of the Bene Gesserit and the belief that he is the one. But Paul resents this idea and the burden that comes with it. While on the run, his influence remains, and it helps keep their story going. Duncan finds them and brings them to the Fremen before giving his life to save Paul. Later, while flying through a storm, it's Paul's visions that save him by advising him to safety, for which I think you can credit his competence. But there's one last roadblock that can't be overcome with just competence and influence. If Paul's going to make it through this story, he's going to need to embrace fate and the burden it comes with. When Jamis challenges his mother to a deathmatch, Paul steps up to the plate. His competence in fighting is more than enough to keep him alive, but to settle the match, he must commit to killing Jamis. He must commit to the future he has seen and the fate he's been afraid of. Finally, he finishes Jamis, and like the voices said, Paul Atreides died too. The Kwisatz Haderach replaced him. Suddenly, a change was evident in Paul's character. While his mother wanted to flee the planet, Paul was now committed to following the path of the Fremen, showing he had finally built resolve. His 3 protagonist traits now approached a balance, setting up Dune 2. My framework suggests that a more balanced protagonist will make for a better story, and while I don't know what will happen in Dune 3, as I'm movie only, I think I speak for most of us when I say that Dune 2 really took the story to that next level. To that, we have Paul's influence, competence, and of course, resolve to thank. With this protagonist series, I really like to throw curveballs when I bounce between characters that I put in the same category. So believe it or not, sitting with Paul Atreides in the prodigy category is none other than Shrek the Ogre. Shrek is like the cover boy for Unchosen Ones, because if it were up to him, there would be no Shrek movie, just him in his swamp. But he'll come to learn that there's a fate in store for him that he would have never pursued on his own. It just takes him an entire movie to accept it. Let's check out where he falls on the chart. Regarding influence as the local ogre, Shrek has quite a bad reputation. The humans fear him and they want him dead. But remember, influence is not just a title. It's charisma as well. It's an attraction. And with fairy tale creatures like Donkey, Shrek quickly charms him to the point where he couldn't shake him off if he tried. As for competence, Shrek is in a league of his own. He's strong and witty, and it kind of makes him unstoppable. But being unstoppable is useless when you don't apply it. And all Shrek wants to apply it to is being left alone. At the start of the movie, I wouldn't really say Shrek has resolve. Of course, he has a motivation to get his swamp back, and that's what sets the entire story in motion. But I want to make a distinction between a motivation and resolve. Resolve means having a dream, making something a priority, and making sacrifices. For Shrek to get his swamp back, he doesn't need resolve, he just needs to put one foot in front of the other. For that reason, I'd pin Shrek here, with 60% competence, 30% influence, and 10% resolve. So Shrek starts his journey, getting sent off with cheers from the fairy tale creatures. In a short time, he's already face to face with Farquaad, and dominates his competition with a fierce display of competence. Seeing this strength, Farquaad makes Shrek his champion, which, fun fact, is actually what I almost called this trope. Anyway, Shrek strikes up a deal with Farquaad to get his swamp back. I'd call this influence because he's persuading another character to help advance the story. So now the real story starts, and Shrek and Donkey go off to save the princess, a task that no knight had ever set out to do and made it back alive from. Shrek, however, makes light work of the entire extraction, from neutralizing the dragon to securing the princess. This is what makes me comfortable with calling him a prodigy. He's so competent that he effortlessly does what no other character could. The princess is enamored to have been saved and wants Shrek to reveal himself. But remember, he isn't interested in anything like love because that would take resolve. He just wants his swamp. But as they progress on their trip back, he starts to rub off on her. This is that attractive charisma I mentioned earlier. It's his influence. Pretty quickly, the two fall for each other, but it's abruptly ended by a stupid miscommunication. So Shrek delivers Fiona to Farquaad, getting his swamp back in return. Everything he wanted, right? Wrong. There's a new part within Shrek that isn't ready to give up. For the first time, Shrek exhibits true resolve. He loves Fiona, and he won't let anything get in the way of that. Now, with balance in his character, he and his posse ride to the wedding to stop the marriage. Despite everyone laughing at him, he sticks to his guns and commits to his love, fulfilling the prophecy that he didn't even realize had chosen him from the start. I think at the heart of this prodigy character trope is acceptance. In the previous 2 examples, we've seen characters accept fate by fulfilling prophecies. But another staple of acceptance is accepting responsibility, the classic coming-of-age story. For that, let's check out one of my favorite examples in The Lion King. I think Simba is a perfect example of an unchosen one because for the bulk of the movie, he's actively not choosing himself, even when the world needs him most. Let's start by finding where Simba falls on the chart. As the son to King Mufasa, Simba's strongest trait by far is his influence. Everyone orbits around him because one day he'll rule them all. But he also has a charisma and likability to him that plays a part as well. As for competence, I'll be honest and say it doesn't play the most active role throughout most of the story, but it's certainly implied through his physical gifts. I mean, there's a reason it's called the Lion King and not like the Zebra King or whatever. Lions are some of the strongest and most capable animals in the animal kingdom. Lastly, what about resolve? At the start, Simba thinks he knows what he wants. I mean, he performs an entire song and dance about how ready he is to be king. But that readiness is completely misguided and goes away entirely when he's deceived by his uncle Scar. At this point, Simba's resolve is completely absent. So I'll pin Simba here at 70% influence and 30% competence, left for dead with 0% resolve, which is where I think the story really begins. Through his natural influence as a lion, a pair of drifters in Timon and Pumbaa find him and take him under their wing, where he learns their ways of Hakuna Matata, a lifestyle of no responsibility. This is that classic influence on autopilot. Simba's story progresses thanks to his natural attractiveness, and it paid off for the duo too. Later in the story, when they're nearly hunted by a lioness, it's Simba who comes to the rescue. Here he displays that lion competence I mentioned earlier. Only another lion could have gone toe-to-toe with her and lived. And while Simba loses the fight, he wins the battle, because he recognizes Lioness as Nala, his childhood friend. She urges him to return to Pride Rock and save everybody from Scar's rule. But remember, Simba is a character with no resolve, so he rejects his responsibility to his clan in favor of this drifter lifestyle. However, Simba's influence stretches further than he could ever know, and just because he's ready to quit on the world doesn't mean the world is ready to let him. Rafiki helps Simba connect to his father's spirit, who reminds him that he's basically the chosen one. With this push, Simba starts to show signs of resolve, which guides him back home to confront Scar. His character is finally reaching a balance. His influence gives him support in the form of both old and new friends. His competence helps him defeat Scar in the final fight. And lastly, his newfound resolve helps him finally embrace what it means to be king. This last pick is a bit counterintuitive for a video about unchosen ones, because when her sister was picked at random for the 74th annual Hunger Games, Katniss Everdeen ends up choosing herself as the tribute instead. There's no prophecy that claims she's the chosen one, and no shoes she has to fill. She just has a willingness to protect her family. If you feel like this doesn't sound like the previous Prodigy examples at all, hear me out, because I think the heart of the first Hunger Games movie is all about Katniss finding resolve. So in terms of competence, there's few characters that can compete with Katniss when she has a bow in her hands. In a story about a battle royale deathmatch, I think we can all see how that competence will help progress her story forward. As for influence, coming from District 12, she has no pull coming from any position of power. But as we progress through the first half of the movie, we come to learn that she has a fiery charisma that captivates everyone around her. Her score of 11 on a scale of 12 gives us a very good understanding of her influence, which will certainly come to her aid down the line. But what about that pesky resolve? This is where I need you guys to hear me out for a second. It would be a blatant lie if I were to tell you Katniss Everdeen didn't have any resolve. I said earlier that resolve takes sacrifice, and when she volunteers as tribute, that clearly checks. But once she ensures Prim is safe, she loses that spark and just goes through the motions of the story. There's a scene earlier when her friend Gale talks about rebelling against the system, and she just brushes it off. No ambition, just complacency. Which is why I would pin Katniss here, with 45% competence, 45% influence, and 10% resolve, signaling to us that this will be a story about finding something to fight for. I've already mentioned a few times that influence can put a story on autopilot, and I don't think the Hunger Games is much different. Sure, Katniss becomes the tribute on her own will, but then she just gets dragged through the pre-games process for the first half of the movie. The pressure is never on her to keep the story going. Once the games start though, the fate of the story is in her hands. On the first day, half the competition is wiped out, but Katniss is competent enough to not take the bait at the cornucopia. Later on, when she gets burned in a forest fire, her influence comes to her rescue. Sponsors deliver her burn medicine because they like having her around. But they're not the only ones who want her alive. A pack of competitors drive her up a tree where she's essentially a sitting duck. However, another competitor, Rue, gives Katniss the tip to drop a nest of tracker jackers onto her opponents. I personally would have preferred if Katniss thought of this on her own, but I guess you can chalk this friendly tip up to Katniss's influence. Look, I never said this movie was perfect, I just think it aligns with this trope. Anyways, Katniss's new ally keeps her safe for a few days, which I would definitely credit to Katniss's influence. Rue didn't have to save her, but something about Katniss must have just captivated her. Together with Katniss' strategic plan and laser-sharp accuracy, they're able to take out their opponent's supplies. Katniss ends up getting a lot of external help in this movie, and we could call it influence, but I wouldn't argue if you call some of it plot armor. Like, when Hamish gets the rules bent to allow 2 victors, I think it's fair to say this is a result of Katniss' likability. But when Katniss is pinned to the ground and dead to rights, yet miraculously gets saved by another competitor, I might call this one plot armor. But we aren't here to critique the movie as much as we are to see how the trope works. So let's flash forward a little to Katniss' display of extreme competence in the final fight. With Peeta held hostage by Cato, Katniss perfectly snipes Cato's hand with her bow, freeing Peeta and securing the victory for them both. But the story's not done. It has one last ask of Katniss, and it's something she hasn't really shown since the first scene. It needs her to fight for something. An announcement is made saying that only one of them can emerge the victor. But this time, Katniss doesn't just comply with what the story asks of her. This time, she fights for something bigger than herself. In a pact with Peeta, she's prepared to eat poisonous berries, ruining the Hunger Games by killing them both. Finally, she exhibits resolve, because she defies against the path laid out for her. And with this, she gets the rulers to concede. Her competence and her influence carried her throughout the entire journey, but ultimately, it was a newfound resolve that saved her and Peeta's lives. So hopefully through these 4 examples, we've seen how competence and influence can carry story only so far. Eventually, resolve will have to come in, and resolve can't just be a motivation, it has to be everything. If you've enjoyed watching this video, I ask that you like and subscribe. The next video is going to feature characters with resolve and influence who lack competence, which I think makes for a really fun dynamic. So make sure you hit that bell so you don't miss out. As always, thanks for watching.